Night settles over the mountains of Switzerland. The air is thin, and the stars seem close enough to touch. A lone figure sits beside a window, wrapped in a heavy coat, a notebook open on his lap. The candle beside him flickers, trembles, and steadies again, its light spilling across pages crowded with restless handwriting. The hand that writes is trembling, not from fear, but from exhaustion, an exhaustion born of thought. This is Friedrich Nietzsche, somewhere between illness and vision, between collapse and creation. The night is cold, but his mind burns with clarity. He writes, he pauses, he breathes, and in that fragile rhythm between breath and idea, a new philosophy is being born, one that will unsettle the world. He once wrote, "I am not a man, I am dynamite." But dynamite does not explode at once. It waits, silent, patient, while pressure builds in the shadows. Tonight, in the stillness of the alpine dark, that pressure hums quietly, like a storm still far away. Nietzsche's story begins not in chaos, but in the calm before it. He was born in 1844 in a small village in Saxony into a family of faith. His father was a Lutheran pastor, a gentle and learned man who died before Nietzsche was 5. The boy grew up surrounded by women, his mother, his sister, his aunts, each carrying their own quiet grief. The father's absence left a hollow space that religion could not fill, but it also left behind a strange inheritance, the sense that life itself was a kind of sermon, and that meaning must be sought, not received. As a child, Nietzsche was serious and delicate, fond of solitude, of reading and composing little pieces of music. The village around him was small, but his inner world already vast. He walked through fields, reciting verses of Greek tragedy, and felt the echo of something ancient calling from within. He did not yet have words for it, but it was there, the voice that would later become his philosophy, the call of chaos, the song of becoming. When he entered university, he studied theology first, as expected of a pastor's son. But faith, to him, was a house built too small, its walls pressed against his mind. Soon, he moved to philology, the study of language and classical texts, and found in the ancient Greeks something deeper than belief, a dialogue with existence itself. In Homer and Heraclitus, in the tragedies of Aeschylus, and the aphorisms of Parmenides, he felt life speaking not in commandments, but in contradictions. The Greeks had known joy and despair, creation and destruction as one and the same dance. They had known that truth, if it exists, must be sung, not stated. In their myths, he recognized his own reflection. Apollo and Dionysus, order and ecstasy, locked forever in creative tension. Apollo built the form, Dionysus broke it. Apollo reasoned, Dionysus danced. Between them, life shimmered, fragile and eternal. Nietzsche would later call this the foundation of all art, all vitality, all human greatness, the balance between discipline and intoxication. Without order, there is madness. Without passion, there is death. And so he began to write, not as a theologian, not even as a scholar, but as a poet of ideas. He believed that thought must sing. In his early years as a professor at Basel, he wrote The Birth of Tragedy, a strange and luminous book that saw art as the only redemption of existence. It was not success that greeted him, but ridicule. The scholars of his time wanted clarity, definitions, systems. Nietzsche gave them poetry, myth, and music. They turned away, calling him unscientific. But the rejection only deepened his solitude, and solitude, for Nietzsche, was not punishment. It was fuel. He once said, one must still have chaos in oneself to give birth to a dancing star. That sentence, like a quiet spark, holds the essence of his philosophy. Chaos is not disorder, it is potential. It is the unformed energy from which creation arises. To live is not to suppress chaos, but to dance with it. The world, to Nietzsche, was not a structure, it was a storm, and meaning was not given. It was made moment by moment through the act of living itself. But such thoughts do not come without a price. The mind that looks too long into chaos risks becoming chaos. Nietzsche's health, fragile from youth, began to falter. Migraines, insomnia, and stomach pains haunted him. The noise of the world became unbearable, and he withdrew further into isolation. His life became a rhythm of suffering and revelation, each illness followed by insight, each collapse followed by creation. In the mountains, he found air thin enough for his thoughts. He wrote in small notebooks, walking for hours alone among the rocks. Sometimes he laughed aloud to himself, sometimes he wept. He saw visions in the sunlight, visions of humanity not as it is, but as it could be. He imagined a new kind of person, one who would live without the crutch of gods, without fear of eternity, without shame before the truth of existence. He called this being the Übermensch, the overman, the one who creates value instead of obeying it. But that vision was still far away. For now, he was still Friedrich Nietzsche, the sick man, the lonely man, the misunderstood professor. He left the university, left the city, left the noise of the scholars and the clergy alike. He carried only books, notebooks, and pain. In letters to his few friends, he wrote not of despair, but of liberation. Now I am free, he said, free from institutions, free from reputation, free even from comfort. In solitude, he began to hear the music of thought again. Nietzsche's life was a continual shedding of skins. Each phase destroyed the one before it, as if he were his own sculptor, chipping away everything false. He loved truth, but not the cold truth of logic, the burning truth that transforms. He wrote, "What does not kill me makes me stronger," and he lived that line until his body broke beneath it. His philosophy was not written from luxury, but from endurance. Each idea cost him days of pain, each insight another layer of himself. And yet, amid all this, there was joy. Not the joy of pleasure, but the joy of affirmation, the courage to say yes to life, even when it hurts. He called this amor fati, love of fate, to love not in spite of what happens, but because it happens, to accept everything, even suffering, as necessary, as beautiful. This, to him, was the highest strength, the strength to look at the world and say, I would live this again. As you listen, you may notice the rhythm of his words feels like breathing, intense, then calm, tragic, then luminous. Nietzsche's writing is not a doctrine, but a pulse. It beats between despair and ecstasy, between question and laughter. He never wanted followers. He wanted awakenings. He wanted each reader to become their own philosopher, their own creator of meaning. If Spinoza found peace in necessity, Nietzsche found peace in the storm itself. Where Spinoza whispered, all is one, Nietzsche replied, all is becoming. Where Spinoza sought serenity, Nietzsche sought intensity. But both, in their own ways, reached the same horizon, the union of the human spirit with the truth of existence. Spinoza found God in the order of nature. Nietzsche found divinity in the courage to face its chaos. He would later say, you must become who you are. And though it sounds simple, it is perhaps the hardest command. for it means to peel away every borrowed belief, every comfort, every mask, until only the raw self remains. To become who you are is not to invent yourself. It is to reveal yourself. It is to live without illusions, and yet without despair. It is to dance on the edge of the abyss, and not fall, but fly. In the stillness of that mountain night, Nietzsche looks out the window. The moon hangs above the peaks, silent and immense. The candle beside him burns low, the flame trembling but steady. He writes one last line before closing his notebook. The higher we soar, the smaller we appear to those who cannot fly. The ink dries, the mind quiets. Outside, the wind moves through the pines with the sound of eternity breathing. Inside, a philosopher rests, his thoughts alive in the air, his chaos momentarily at peace. And so begins the journey through Nietzsche's philosophy, a descent into the depths of meaning, and a slow ascent toward light, a movement not away from chaos, but through it, until chaos itself becomes the song of life. Morning races slowly over the fields of Brocken. Mist curls around the grass, and the bell of the small Lutheran church sounds faint in the distance. Somewhere, in a modest house beside that church, a child presses his ear to the window pane, listening. Every note seems to echo through his bones. This child is Friedrich Nietzsche, the boy who will one day speak of gods and chaos, but who now listens only to the quiet music of the world. His mother, Franziska, tends the household with strict devotion. His father, Karl Ludwig, has already passed into memory. The boy remembers his sermons, his soft hands, the way his voice filled the little church with conviction. Death came early to the Nietzsche family, swift, precise, without mercy. The father's illness took him within a year, and then a younger brother soon after. The house filled with silence, but within that silence something began to grow, an awareness that life, fragile as breath, demanded reverence. Friedrich learned early that order could not protect against loss. He watched his mother cling to faith, his aunts quote scripture, his sister Elizabeth repeat prayers until her voice trembled. He respected their piety, but felt its cage. Behind the verses, he sensed the same stillness that haunted his dreams. He wondered if the divine might live not above the world, but inside it, in the wind, in the pain, in the laughter of the living. It was an intuition too dangerous to speak aloud, so he carried it silently, like a hidden flame. As he grew, that flame sought expression. He turned to music first. The piano became his sanctuary. The notes replaced words. He composed small pieces filled with melancholy, fragments that rose and fell like distant storms. His teachers called him gifted, but solitary. He would sit by the instrument long after others had gone, lost in improvisations that seemed less like melody and more like thought made sound. Even then, Nietzsche believed that truth had to be felt before it could be known. At school, he excelled. He memorized Greek poetry and Latin grammar, wrote essays on moral virtue, and astonished his tutors with his precision. But what impressed them most was his seriousness. While other boys laughed or chased through the yard, Friedrich stood aside, observing, as though the game of life were already unfolding before him in miniature. He rarely smiled, though when he did, it carried a strange light, quiet, knowing, almost amused. By adolescence, his mind had become a storm contained in glass. He read Schopenhauer and felt both awe and rebellion. Here was a philosopher who claimed that life was suffering, that desire was the root of pain, that peace lay only in renunciation. Nietzsche understood the argument. He even admired its discipline, but something in him refused it. He felt that life, even in its cruelty, possessed a hidden affirmation, a pulse that demanded not withdrawal, but deeper participation. If suffering was the essence of existence, then perhaps joy was the courage to affirm it. During these years, Nietzsche also discovered the ancient Greeks, not as dusty relics, but as living presences. He loved their tragedies most of all, those dark and radiant stories where heroes faced fate without illusion. In Aeschylus he found grandeur, in Sophocles, balance, in Euripides, rebellion. He saw in them not despair, but artistry, the transformation of pain into beauty. It was the Greeks, he would later say, who first taught humanity how to look at chaos and not turn away. At Forta, the strict boarding school he attended, discipline ruled every hour. The students marched between study and prayer. Silence was enforced, obedience expected. Nietzsche endured it outwardly, but inwardly remained untamed. He filled his notebooks with quotations from Heraclitus. The way up and the way down are one and the same. Those words, ancient and cryptic, stayed with him. They spoke of unity within opposites, of life as a perpetual tension. He sensed, even then, that he would spend his life tracing that tension to its source. Yet for all his intellect, Nietzsche was not a creature of abstraction. He longed for experience. He walked in storms, hiked through forests, studied the play of light across the hills. He once wrote that to understand a thought fully, one must walk while thinking, because movement awakens the body's own philosophy. The rhythm of steps, the pressure of wind, the heartbeat in the chest, these too were teachers. In motion, he found clarity. In solitude, companionship. As he entered the University of Bonn, the world of ideas opened wider. He began with theology, as expected of a pastor's son, but soon the lectures felt hollow. He could no longer repeat doctrines that rang false to his inner ear. He read the Bible not as revelation, but as literature, a tapestry of human longing. The words of faith no longer carried authority. They carried poetry. To him, this was not blasphemy, but honesty. To love truth more than comfort. He abandoned theology and turned fully to philology, the study of language and ancient texts. In words, he found history. In syntax, soul. He traced how meaning shifts, how each age invents its own gods through speech. Language, he realized, was not a mirror of reality, but its creator. From that insight would later grow his critique of truth itself, that what we call truth is merely a metaphor we have forgotten is a metaphor. His professors noticed his brilliance. One of them, the great philologist Ritschl, said of him, "If I had such a student once in a lifetime, I would count myself fortunate." At 24, Nietzsche was offered a professorship at Basel, an unprecedented honor. He accepted, though his health was already fragile. Migraines plagued him, his eyesight faltered. But for a time, intellect triumphed over pain. He lectured on Greek tragedy with the passion of a poet. His students listened, half in awe, half in confusion, as he spoke not only of language but of life, of art, of the eternal tension between the Apollonian and the Dionysian. It was during these Basel years that Nietzsche met Richard Wagner, the composer whose music thundered through Europe like revelation. Wagner was everything Nietzsche admired: bold, creative, defiant. For a while, Nietzsche believed he had found a kindred spirit, someone who could translate philosophy into sound. Their friendship burned brightly, too brightly. Nietzsche spent long evenings at Wagner's villa in Triebschen, surrounded by music, philosophy, and illusion. The notes of Tristan und Isolde filled him with ecstasy. He believed he heard in them the pulse of Dionysus himself. But as with all idols, the light that first dazzles can also blind. The friendship would later shatter, leaving Nietzsche with the pain of disillusionment, but also the gift of independence. He realized that every attachment, no matter how noble, can become a chain if it demands obedience. To think freely is to risk solitude. To remain loyal to one's own vision is to accept exile. He would carry that lesson into every book he wrote afterward. During these same years, illness returned like a shadow. His body could not match the velocity of his mind. He began to withdraw from public life, spending long months alone in the Swiss Alps. There, the elements became his conversation partners: the wind, the snow, the silence. He walked for hours, notebook in hand, letting the rhythm of his steps dictate the rhythm of his thoughts. He called these walks his dialogues with eternity. It was here among the peaks that Nietzsche began to sense the outlines of a new philosophy, one that would move beyond pessimism and faith alike. He wanted a thought that could embrace the whole of existence, not just its comforts. He felt that truth must include suffering, not deny it. That meaning must arise from within life, not outside it. If there were gods, they would have to dance. If there were salvation, it would have to come through creation. In letters to friends, he wrote of this emerging vision: I seek not salvation, but justification, for existence as it is, not as it should be. That sentence holds the seed of everything to come. It means that life needs no excuse beyond itself. To exist is already sacred. To affirm it is to worship in the only temple that never falls, the temple of being. Yet the birth of this vision was painful. Nietzsche often lay awake at night, his head throbbing, the world spinning. Sometimes he could not read or write for days. But even in weakness, his mind worked. He would whisper fragments of thought aloud, testing their truth against his own suffering. He realized that philosophy worth having must survive pain. If an idea breaks when the body breaks, it was never truth but decoration. From this discipline of endurance emerged his unique tone, half prophet, half poet, half physician of the soul. He wrote not to instruct, but to awaken, not to console, but to strengthen. Every line he wrote was an act of resistance against despair, and within that resistance he found a strange joy. He called that joy yes-saying, the affirmation of life in all its contradictions. It was the antidote to nihilism, the disease he believed haunted modern humanity, the sense that nothing matters, that all values have crumbled. Nietzsche did not deny that void. He stared into it and smiled. If meaning had collapsed, then the task was not to mourn, but to create anew. He would later write, "We must become gods ourselves, merely to appear worthy of it." To create one's own values was for him the ultimate act of freedom. In the years ahead, he would give names to these insights: the will to power, the Übermensch, the eternal recurrence. But for now, they were seeds still underground, gathering strength in the dark. He could feel them growing even as his body weakened. His sickness was not his enemy, it was his crucible. He once said, "My illnesses have been my greatest teachers." In them, he learned that pain is not the opposite of growth, but its condition. The boy who had grown up under the shadow of the church had now built his own cathedral, not of stone, but of thought. Its pillars were music and tragedy, its altar the human heart. Here there were no prayers, only affirmations, no commandments, only creations. He did not seek heaven, he sought depth, and in that depth he began to hear again the echo that had followed him since childhood, the whisper of chaos, now transformed into harmony. The candle burns low once more. Nietzsche closes his notebook, the pages filled with fragments, aphorisms, questions, laughter. Outside, the storm gathers across the mountains, but he does not fear it. Storms, he once said, are the breath of life. They remind us that to live is to be shaken, to be torn open, to be remade. He stands at the window. The lightning flashes across the peaks, revealing the vastness of the world he has chosen to face alone. He smiles, not with pride, but with recognition. In every flash he sees himself, a child of order and storm. The wind howls and he whispers, one must still have chaos in oneself to give birth to a dancing star. The echo returns, softer now, as though the storm itself is singing it back. And in that dialogue between man and mountain, chaos and calm, the philosopher of the future is born again, awake, alive, and luminous within the darkness. The years have turned, the mountain air grows colder. Nietzsche's beard has thickened, his eyes sharpened by solitude. He walks the same stony paths above Lake Silvaplana, each step a meditation. The valleys below shimmer with morning fog, the peaks cut through it like blades of light. Here, among these silent ranges, the philosopher begins to loosen the final ties that bind him to the old world. One by one, he breaks his idols, those comforting illusions that once called themselves truth. The first idol to fall is friendship. Richard Wagner, once his hero, now feels like a distant echo. Their correspondence, once full of music and devotion, has turned cold. Nietzsche visits him in Bayreuth for the premiere of Parsifal and feels a wave of nausea. Every gesture, every chord seems drenched in the piety he has left behind. Wagner, the revolutionary artist, has become a priest. The opera is beautiful, but its beauty smells of incense and obedience. Nietzsche leaves the theater before the final act. In his hotel room, he sits at the window, staring into the blackness. The night feels endless. He whispers to himself, "I am no one's disciple." The words tremble, then steady. A chain breaks quietly. The loss wounds him. Wagner had been the father he never knew, a guide and a mirror, a promise of greatness. But Nietzsche realizes that every bond, however noble, can become a prison if it asks for faith instead of freedom. To think is to betray one's teachers. He closes the curtains, opens his notebook, and begins to write again. Out of heartbreak, a new voice emerges, clearer, colder, freer. From that voice comes a declaration that will echo for centuries. God is dead. He does not mean a corpse in the sky, nor blasphemy against the divine, but the quiet vanishing of belief itself. The God of certainty, of absolute meaning, of moral law, that God has bled out beneath the scalpel of reason and science. We killed him, Nietzsche says, when we placed truth above faith, when we chose inquiry over obedience. And now the light that guided the world has gone out. The night grows darker, not because the world has changed, but because the eyes of humankind must learn to see without a sun. He writes, "God is dead, God remains dead, and we have killed him. How shall we comfort ourselves, the murderers of all murderers?" The tone is not triumph, but mourning. Nietzsche feels the silence that follows the death of faith, an immense, terrifying freedom. Without the old commandments, who will tell us what is good, what is evil, what is true? He sees a future trembling at the edge of this abyss, a world without foundations, where humans must invent meaning for themselves. And though it frightens him, he knows there is no turning back. Every collapse is also a beginning. He calls this condition nihilism, the sickness of meaninglessness. It is not a choice but a fate, the shadow cast by reason's victory. Science, morality, religion, all have lost their certainty. Humans stand naked before existence, surrounded by infinite possibilities, but guided by none. Most will look away, fleeing into distraction or dogma. But a few, Nietzsche believes, will face the void and learn to dance on its edge. He calls these few the creators, those who will give birth to new values out of courage, not tradition. They will not seek truth in heaven or scripture, but in the pulse of life itself. They will say yes to the earth, yes to suffering, yes to impermanence. From their strength, a new kind of human will arise, not a master over others, but a master of the self, the Übermensch. The word trembles with danger. It has been misunderstood, twisted, and claimed by powers Nietzsche never imagined. But in his mind, it was not a call to domination. It was a call to creation. The Übermensch is the child of the future, the one who turns chaos into art, pain into power, solitude into song. He does not obey inherited morality. He invents his own. He does not worship the past. He shapes what comes next. To explain this, Nietzsche uses the image of a rope stretched over an abyss. Humanity, he says, is not an end but a bridge, a crossing from animal to creator. Each generation must walk that rope, trembling above the void, guided only by courage. The danger is great, but the reward is freedom. Yet even as he writes these words, Nietzsche's body falters again. The migraines return. Light pierces his eyes like knives. He cannot read for long. He eats little. He coughs blood. He retreats once more to solitude, the small rented rooms of Sils Maria, the high plains where the air feels almost celestial. Here he walks among the rocks and the lakes, carrying his thoughts like companions. He greets the silence as an equal. One day, beside the shimmering water of Lake Silvaplana, he stops. He has been walking for hours, mind drifting through images of recurrence, of time looping endlessly upon itself. Suddenly the idea strikes him, not as theory but as revelation. What if every moment of life repeats eternally? What if this very step, this very breath, must return again and again, forever? He calls this thought the eternal recurrence. It is both a riddle and a test. If you could live the same life again, infinitely, would you curse it or bless it? To bless it, Nietzsche says, is the mark of greatness. The one who can affirm eternal return has learned the deepest form of amor fati, love of fate. He has learned to love existence without condition. For Nietzsche, this vision is both terrifying and liberating. It means that every choice matters infinitely. Every pain, every joy, every failure, every sunrise will recur. You cannot escape the weight of your own affirmation. To say yes to life is to say yes to everything within it, forever. Few can bear such a vision, but those who can will glow with a strength unknown to ordinary men. That night he writes until dawn. His hand aches, his eyes blur, but he feels alive as never before. He writes, "My formula for greatness in a human being is amor fati, that one wants nothing to be different, not forward, not backward, not in all eternity. This is the opposite of despair. It is not resignation, but rejoicing. Even suffering becomes sacred when seen through this lens. To love one's fate completely, that is to become one with the flow of life. But greatness has its solitude. The world does not yet understand him. Publishers reject his manuscripts. Critics mock him. Former friends avoid him. His sister Elizabeth grows distant, drawn toward politics and piety that he despises. He writes in poverty, living from a small pension, his books selling almost nothing. He jokes bitterly, "I am not a man, I am posthumous." Still he continues. He writes, "Thus spoke Zarathustra," a book like no other, half poem, half prophecy. Its central figure, Zarathustra, descends from the mountains to teach humanity the wisdom of the earth. He preaches not salvation, but transformation. His language glows with paradox and laughter. Man is something that shall be overcome. Remain true to the earth. I teach you the Übermensch. The book confuses his few readers. Some call it madness, others music. Nietzsche himself sees it as his most personal creation, the child of solitude. In its pages, he becomes both poet and prophet, merging philosophy and myth. The rhythms of the text echo his walks among the peaks. Its imagery shines like sunlight on snow. Each line breathes his belief that wisdom must dance, that truth must sing. Zarathustra's laughter rings through the book, a laughter that comes not from denial, but from transcendence. It is the laughter of one who has survived despair. Nietzsche writes, "I would only believe in a God who could dance." That sentence contains his revolution. The divine is not solemn, but joyful, not outside the world, but woven through it. To dance with existence is to worship it. Yet even as he creates his masterpiece, Nietzsche's health collapses further. He loses vision in one eye, suffers violent headaches, trembles with fatigue. He writes lying down, propped by pillows, light dimmed to protect his eyes. The body declines, but the spirit rises. He no longer seeks recognition, he seeks completion. He writes not to be read, but to remain alive. His next books, Beyond Good and Evil, The Genealogy of Morals, The Gay Science, refine his attack on the moral traditions of the West. He exposes how morality hides the will to power, the instinct to dominate masked as virtue. He unmasks pity as disguised control, humility as disguised resentment. He calls this resentment resentiment, the poison of those who cannot act and therefore condemn those who can. The noble spirit, he says, creates values. The weak spirit judges them. To overcome this sickness, one must return to life's innocence, the strength to say yes without guilt. Such ideas are dangerous, even today. But Nietzsche does not propose cruelty. He proposes authenticity, to live without masks, to act from abundance rather than lack, to create rather than imitate. That is his morality. He wants humans to stand upright before existence, unashamed of their own strength. The will to power, in his sense, is not conquest over others, but mastery of oneself, the transformation of chaos into form. He writes, "To become what one is, that is the highest destiny." It echoes the lessons of his life: solitude, suffering, creation. Each was a teacher. Each carved him into clarity. Outside, the wind rattles the shutters of his small room. His table is cluttered with draughts, candles, glasses of cooling tea. He pauses, closes his eyes, and listens to the silence. The silence is not empty. It hums with presence, the same hum he heard as a child, this same music of the Greeks, the same echo of chaos. Now he knows it by name. He smiles faintly. Everything he once feared has become part of his strength. The death of God has not destroyed him. It has freed him. The loneliness of exile has not broken him. It has given him voice. The sickness of his body has not silenced him. It has taught him depth. From every fracture, light has entered. He writes his final line of the night. What does not kill me makes me stronger. The candle flickers low, the ink dries. Outside, the storm passes over the mountains and leaves the air clear again. The philosopher rests, not in certainty, but in affirmation. He has broken his idols and found within the ruins something greater, the courage to create. And in the stillness of that dawn, the thought that began as dynamite becomes a whisper of peace. For even in Nietzsche's fiercest words, beneath the thunder and the laughter, there runs a current of calm, the calm of one who has made peace with the abyss. He has looked into it and found not terror, but reflection. And in that reflection, eternity gazes back. The light of dawn seeps slowly through the shutters. Nietzsche lies awake, his head resting on a folded blanket. Outside, a soft wind moves through the valley, carrying the scent of pine and melting snow. His body aches, the familiar rhythm of pain that marks each morning, but the ache has become an old companion. He breathes through it quietly, deliberately. Every breath is a small affirmation. I am still here. There is a stillness in this moment, a kind of purity. The fever of thought has cooled. The thunder of rebellion has softened. What remains is clarity, not the clarity of argument, but of acceptance. Nietzsche has fought against gods, against dogmas, against his own frailty. Now he begins to see that resistance itself was always a form of love, the love of life that refuses to lie. In his small room in Sils Maria, he opens the window. The cold air brushes his face. Below, the lake gleams like polished silver, perfectly still. He writes a few words in his notebook, amor fati, love your fate. The phrase is simple, but beneath it lies the depth of his philosophy, the turning point from defiance to serenity. Where others sought to escape suffering, Nietzsche sought to embrace it. Where others cursed necessity, he blessed it. To love one's fate means to love the whole of it, the joy and the pain, the victory and the loss, the laughter and the illness, all of it as one indivisible song. He had always written of strength, but here he discovers its gentlest form, the strength to accept. Amor fati is not resignation, it is participation. It is to say yes to everything, even to the moments that break us. It is to stand before life and declare, you are beautiful, even when you wound me. This thought comes not from comfort, but from necessity. Nietzsche's days are filled with solitude and sickness. He eats little, sleeps less, walks endlessly through the mountains to steady his nerves. He knows that his body is failing him, that his mind is often close to collapse, and yet he does not despair. He treats each pain as part of his education, each weakness as a new kind of strength. He writes, to see beauty even in necessity, this is my highest insight. It is in these years that Nietzsche's philosophy becomes less a system and more a rhythm. He no longer writes as a professor or even as a critic. He writes as one who listens to the heartbeat of existence. His thoughts come in flashes, aphorisms, like lightning over the mountains. Each one begins as a wound and ends as a revelation. He knows that truth cannot be captured in systems. It must be experienced, lived, danced. In one of his notebooks, he sketches a circle perfectly drawn. Beneath it, he writes only a question. Would you live this again? This is the question of the eternal return. It began, as so many of his ideas did, during a walk through the Alps. He had been hiking for hours, the sky clear, the peaks shimmering. Then, as if whispered by the wind, the thought came to him. What if time is not a line, but a circle? What if every moment you live will return again, endlessly, identically, forever? He did not mean it as physics, but as a test of spirit. If this life, with all its joys and sorrows, were to repeat eternally, would you bless it or curse it? Could you love your existence so deeply that you would will it again infinitely? That, he thought, was the ultimate affirmation. To say yes not only to today, but to eternity. To live in such a way that you would choose the same life again and again. For Nietzsche, this was not a metaphysical claim, but an ethical one. It asks of us, how should we live if we must live forever with the consequences? Each decision, each gesture, each breath acquires infinite weight. You cannot hide behind hope or escape. Eternity mirrors your every act. To live well, then, is not to flee time, but to inhabit it fully, to turn every instant into something worth reliving. He writes, the greatest weight, imagine it. This life, as you now live it, you will have to live once more and innumerable times more. Would you throw yourself down and gnash your teeth, or would you answer, you are a god, and never have I heard anything more divine? The thought terrifies him at first. To accept every moment forever, every failure, every sickness, feels impossible. But then he realizes it is not a punishment, it is a mirror of one's love. To love life enough to desire its eternal return is to have overcome despair. It is to be at peace with existence, to trust the necessity of all things. He calls it the yes saying. And the opposite of this yes is nihilism, the no saying, the weariness of spirit that wants the world to be otherwise. Most people, he thinks, live as though they resent life, as though they endure it, waiting for some afterlife, some redemption, some ending. But the philosopher of the future must learn to love the world as it is, without heaven, without purpose, without escape. He must learn to say yes even to his pain, because pain too belongs to life. Nietzsche looks out the window. The sun is setting now, spreading gold across the peaks. He whispers, my yes has said yes to all that was. The words are almost prayerful, and indeed, amor fati becomes his prayer, a secular sanctity, a devotion without gods. Each breath, each moment of endurance becomes a hymn to the sacredness of being. His writings from these years, the gay science, exe homo, twilight of the idols, glow with this strange joy. They are sharp and lyrical, fierce and tender. He mocks philosophers and priests, but the mockery hides compassion. He pities them not for believing, but for fearing life. He writes, the secret for harvesting the greatest fruitfulness and the greatest enjoyment from existence is to live dangerously. Build your cities on the slopes of Vesuvius. To live dangerously for Nietzsche does not mean recklessness. It means to embrace uncertainty, to lean into the unknown, to trust the dance of existence even when it shakes. The safest life, he believes, is often the smallest. The truest life is the one that risks itself in creation, in love, in truth. At times he imagines his readers far in the future, those who might understand him not as a destroyer, but as a liberator. He writes to them across time. Some are born posthumously. He smiles as he writes it, aware that his own time cannot yet hear him. The seed must rest in the earth before it blooms. And so his work becomes less about the world and more about the spirit. He begins to write not for others, but for the eternal listener within himself. His solitude, once heavy, becomes light. He feels that everything he has lost, health, friends, faith, has purified him. What remains is essence, thought as music, philosophy as poetry. He writes of laughter again, the laughter that belongs to those who have overcome despair. Not the laughter of mockery, but of clarity. He says, the most spiritual human beings experience by far the heaviest burdens, but they know how to turn it into lightest laughter. It is a laughter that carries both knowledge and kindness. It says, yes, life hurts, but it is still worth loving. In these mountain years, Nietzsche's daily life becomes almost monastic. He wakes with the sun, eats bread and milk, walks for hours through the hills. He takes notes on small slips of paper, each thought like a breath of air. Sometimes he sits by the water until dusk, eyes closed, face tilted toward the warmth. He feels that he has entered the deepest layer of silence, the silence beneath thought, where acceptance hums like a low, eternal chord. When he speaks of amor fati, he is not giving advice. He is confessing what he has learned through pain. That joy is not the absence of suffering, but the embrace of it. That peace is not found by escaping the world, but by loving it completely. That truth is not what removes you from life, but what binds you to it with tenderness. He writes in The Gay Science, I want to learn more and more, to see as beautiful what is necessary in things. Then I shall be one of those who make things beautiful. This is the softest, most human side of Nietzsche, the philosopher not as hammer, but as light. He has spent years tearing down illusions. Now he learns to build, not with stone, but with acceptance. One evening, as the wind cools and the lake darkens, he watches the stars appear one by one. He thinks of time, of recurrence, of eternity, not as a threat, but as a promise. He imagines the universe breathing, endlessly returning, forever beginning again. He writes, all joy wants eternity, deep, deep eternity. And with those words, he completes the circle. The eternal return is no longer a burden. It is a love song. Each moment, lived with awareness, becomes infinite. Each heartbeat becomes the heartbeat of the cosmos. There is no longer separation between self and world, only the dance of being. As night falls, Nietzsche closes his notebook. The candlelight glows against the window pane. Beyond it, the reflection of his face blends with the stars. He whispers to himself, yes, once more, forever. The words fade into the silence, but their echo remains. Not loud, not triumphant, but steady. It is the echo of peace, found within struggle, of joy discovered within pain. The echo of a man who has finally learned not just to think about life, but to love it. The winter of 1888 descends on Turin like a soft gray veil. Snow gathers on rooftops. The streets glisten with slush and candlelight. Nietzsche lives alone in a small rented room on Via Carlo Alberto. Each morning he dresses with careful precision. Dark coat, neat collar, gloves that hide the trembling of his hands. Outside, the city hums faintly with the sound of carriages and distant bells. He walks among them unseen, a quiet figure moving through the edges of history. He writes still. Pages scatter across the desk like fallen leaves. Exe Homo, Twilight of the Idols, the Antichrist, the Wagner case. In them, his voice burns brighter than ever. sharp, joyful, prophetic. It is as though the entire weight of his life has condensed into a final burst of light before the flame goes out. He writes with laughter now, laughter that cuts and heals in the same motion. He mocks morality, mocks pity, mocks himself. He calls his own work a song of health. Outside, the air bites. Inside, the fever rises. He barely sleeps. He writes until dawn, then walks the streets, humming fragments of melody beneath his breath. He believes he has reached the summit, a vision where the contradictions of life dissolve into harmony. He feels lighter, freer, almost luminous. But beneath that radiance, something begins to tremble. His mind, stretched by years of solitude and suffering, nears its breaking point. In January 1889, the silence breaks. The story will become legend. A street in Turin, a horse collapsing beneath the whip of its driver. Nietzsche approaches, throws his arms around the animal's neck, and weeps. He whispers to it, strokes its mane, as if trying to console the suffering of the entire world. When the coachman pulls him away, Nietzsche collapses. He never truly returns. The days that follow dissolve into fragments. Letters filled with strange signatures, Dionysus, the crucified, scatter across Europe. He writes to his friends, to kings, to God. Some are beautiful, others incoherent. He signs them, your friend, the philosopher of eternity. Then even the letters stop. The voice that once declared God is dead has fallen into a silence deeper than words. His mother takes him back to Germany, to Naumburg. There she cares for him with steady devotion. He no longer reads or writes. He sits for hours by the window, watching the seasons turn. Sometimes he hums softly, a melody from childhood. Sometimes he smiles for no reason. The fierce intelligence that had cut through the world now drifts through fog. Yet those who visit him remark that his eyes still hold a strange clarity, not madness, but distance, as though he has gone where language cannot follow. Years pass in this half-light. Friends die. The century turns. The world forgets him, then remembers. His books, once ignored, begin to spread quietly among artists, poets, wanderers, those who feel the pulse of his thought, even through its danger. The words he wrote in hunger and solitude find new lives in distant minds, and Nietzsche himself sits in silence, unaware that his ideas are already shaping the next age. There is something almost merciful in this silence. He had lived his philosophy so completely that thought itself had consumed him. Now there is only presence, no argument, no rebellion, no search. The storm has spent itself, and what remains is calm. He breathes, he exists, that is enough. Sometimes his sister Elizabeth reads aloud from his old notes. He does not respond, but his face softens. Perhaps he hears something familiar in the rhythm of his own words, the echo of the mountains, the laughter of Zarathustra, the quiet of eternal return. Perhaps he recognizes that the silence he once sought in philosophy has finally found him. In 1900, on a warm August day, Friedrich Nietzsche dies in Weimar. He is 55. The world he leaves behind is not yet ready for him. It will take decades for his ideas to unfold, to be twisted, misunderstood, redeemed, rediscovered. But in the stillness of that final breath, the circle closes. The thinker who taught that life must be affirmed has lived it to its limit. Even his collapse becomes part of the affirmation, a surrender to what is. The years that follow transform Nietzsche from man into myth. Readers find in his work whatever their hearts already seek: revolution, despair, liberation, danger. Some misuse his words to justify cruelty. Others find in them courage to live more honestly. He cannot defend or correct them. His writings stand like mirrors, reflecting the soul of whoever gazes in. But beyond the noise of interpretation, something quiet endures, the pulse of his real message. It is not a doctrine, not a demand. It is a gesture, a hand pointing toward life itself, a reminder that meaning is not given, but made, that truth is not a cage, but a horizon. When one reads him slowly beneath the thunder, a gentler voice appears, the same voice that whispered in the mountains, "Become who you are." It is not command, but invitation, to live without illusion, without resentment, without fear, to look at existence and say, yes. His philosophy, at its heart, is not destruction, but love, a fierce, unflinching love of reality. Even his proclamation that God is dead was never meant as celebration of loss, but as call to responsibility. If there is no divine order, then the sacred must be created within us. If heaven is silent, then each of us must become the artist of our own world. In this way, Nietzsche's madness is not only tragedy, it is fulfillment. He lived so close to his thought that he crossed its final threshold. Where philosophy ends, silence begins. And in that silence, perhaps he found what words could never reach, the eternal yes that underlies all things. Sometimes, in quiet moments, one can imagine him there still, a man seated by a window, the light of late afternoon spilling across the floor. Outside, the world continues, children laughing, a cart passing, the wind shifting in the trees. Inside, the philosopher breathes, motionless, serene. His notebook lies closed beside him. His pen has fallen silent, but somewhere, deep within, the pulse of his thought continues to hum, low, steady, endless. It hums in the laughter of those who have faced despair and survived it. It hums in the courage of those who choose creation over comfort. It hums in every mind that dares to ask not what life means, but how deeply it can be loved. Perhaps this is the truest form of eternal recurrence, not a cosmic law, but the quiet return of understanding, generation after generation. The flame passes from hand to hand, from thinker to dreamer, from voice to silence, and each time it burns, it whispers the same small word that carried Nietzsche through every storm. Yes, night again. The mountains of Sils Maria are long behind us. The century has changed. The cities have grown louder, the stars more distant. Yet the whisper of one man's thought still drifts through the dark. It moves quietly, like wind through branches, invisible but persistent. It is the whisper of Friedrich Nietzsche, the philosopher who looked into chaos and found not fear, but freedom. His books now rest on countless shelves. Their covers differ, their languages change, but within them burns the same strange warmth, a refusal to turn away from life. Students read him, sometimes trembling, sometimes laughing. Artists quote him, rebels claim him, lovers misunderstand him. And yet beneath all those interpretations, something gentle endures, a call to live truthfully, to affirm one's own existence without apology. He once wrote, "The individual has always had to struggle to keep from being overwhelmed by the tribe." The struggle continues. Every age invents new tribes, ideologies, crowds, algorithms, the endless hum of opinion. But Nietzsche's voice remains a lantern in that noise, reminding us that solitude is not loneliness, but space for the soul to breathe, that thinking is not rebellion against the world, but intimacy with it. In our time, when distraction floods every hour, His words feel almost medicinal. He tells us to slow down, to listen inwardly, to walk again as he did, letting thought and movement merge. He would smile, perhaps sadly, at the frantic search for purpose that defines the modern day. He would remind us that meaning cannot be hunted, it must be created patiently, as one tends a fire in the wind. He taught that strength is not hardness, but depth, that joy is not comfort, but courage, that morality, truth, equity, even identity, all must be remade by each generation. And yet, far from chaos, this freedom contains its own quiet order, the order of those who have learned to say yes. When we read Nietzsche slowly, beneath the storm of his words, we find tenderness. The tenderness of a man who suffered greatly and yet refused to hate existence. He saw that beauty is not the absence of pain, but the embrace of it, that every wound can become a window if one dares to look through. He did not want disciples, he wanted creators. He did not preach doctrines, he offered tools, a hammer to shatter illusions, yes, but also hands to build anew. If Spinoza had taught that peace lies in understanding, Nietzsche teaches that peace lies in becoming. Between them stretches the full breadth of philosophy, from the still order of the cosmos to the wild dance of the human heart. Both sought harmony with reality, both found it in different keys. Spinoza's tone was major, serene, luminous, divine. Nietzsche's was minor, fierce and trembling, human. But together they compose a single melody, the song of existence, learning to love itself. In the stillness of night, their voices blend. Spinoza whispers, "All is one." Nietzsche replies, "All is becoming." And somewhere between the two, a listener closes their eyes, breathing softly, feeling both truths settle into the rhythm of their own heart. Imagine Nietzsche today. He would walk not through mountains, perhaps, but through city streets, lit by neon and rain. He would still look upward, still search for silence among the noise. He would see the same hunger in people's eyes, the wish to know why they exist, the longing to be more than they are. And he would say, "Do not wait for meaning to find you, create it." Each act of honesty, each moment of kindness, each refusal to betray your own intuition, these are your affirmations. Each is a small yes whispered into the vast night. He would remind us that life is not a problem to be solved, but a question to be lived. That even in exhaustion, even in despair, the capacity to say yes remains sacred. He would tell us that laughter is wisdom, that dancing is philosophy in motion, that beauty is not luxury but necessity. He would ask us to live dangerously, not through recklessness, but through sincerity, to risk being ourselves completely, even when the world prefers masks. In this, Nietzsche's legacy is not darkness, but light, not nihilism, but renewal. He showed that when the old gods fall, the sky does not collapse, it opens. And through that opening, something vast and tender shines, the possibility of living without illusion, yet without despair. As centuries pass, philosophies fade and return, but this one endures because it speaks to something timeless, the courage to love reality as it is. Every thinker after him, knowingly or not, converses with his shadow. Psychologists borrow his insights, poets echo his rhythm. Even science carries his suspicion of certainty. But perhaps his truest heirs are not philosophers at all. They are ordinary people who face the day honestly, who endure their pain without bitterness, who create small joys from small hours. They live the philosophy not in books, but in breath. The phrase amor fati, love of fate, has left the library and entered daily speech. It appears on tattoos, on quiet notes tucked into journals, on lips whispering through grief. Its meaning remains the same: to love what happens because it happens, to trust the necessity of every moment. In a world that teaches us to resist, Nietzsche teaches us to embrace. And in that embrace, paradoxically, lies freedom. For those who listen to him in the dark, for those who drift to sleep to the murmur of his words, Nietzsche offers not noise, but stillness. He becomes less a storm and more a rhythm, less a philosopher and more a companion. His ideas, spoken slowly, are like waves against the shore. They arrive or recede and return. They remind us that existence itself is circular, rising, falling, returning, and that to live is to flow with it. Perhaps this is why his story suits the night. The night is where thought softens, where certainty dissolves, where we become porous again to mystery. Nietzsche's philosophy, at its heart, is an invitation to rest in that mystery, to stop demanding that the world explain itself and simply breathe within it. To feel that, even without reason, life is still luminous. He once wrote, "I tell you, one must still have chaos in oneself to give birth to a dancing star." And now, as the centuries turn, those stars shine everywhere. Small acts of courage, of creativity, of love. Each person who dares to live fully becomes one of them, burning quietly against the dark. Night deepens, the world outside is quiet. Only the soft hum of thought remains. If Nietzsche could see this moment, the listeners lying in their rooms, the slow rhythm of their breathing, he would smile. For this too is philosophy, not the shouting of reason, but the calm of reflection. Not the conquest of truth, but communion with being. He would understand that his words, born in suffering, have become lullabies of awareness, guiding others not to sleep through life, but to rest within it. The candle flickers once, twice. The wind presses gently against the window. Somewhere, a clock marks the passage of time, and yet time feels suspended. Only the voice remains, low and steady, carrying across the dark. Life is not elsewhere. Life is here. Love your fate. Just say yes. And with that yes, the story closes. Not with an ending, but a continuation. For every listener who breathes those words becomes part of the same circle, the same eternal return. The thought that began in a lonely mountain hut now rests in the quiet of your own heart, repeating softly, endlessly, yes, once more, forever.